Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Genevieve Newton, Scientific Director of Fringe. Thanks for joining me today to learn about Fringe electrolyte and mineral mix. So this webinar is divided into two parts. In the first part, we're just going to talk about the basics. We're going to go through an overview of electrolytes and minerals, talk about what they are, their biological roles, where to get them, water and electrolytes, electrolyte deficiencies, and then supplementation. We're going to set the stage for the benefits of supplementation so that we can move into the second part and talk about why Fringe mineral and electrolyte mix is really your ideal choice for supplementation in terms of optimizing your health. We're going to talk about our active ingredients, our inactive ingredients, the existing market, safety testing, and then last but not least, how to use. Let's get started. So to start with, we have to talk about what are electrolytes. Electrolytes are something that everyone's heard about, but really very few people can actually define what they are. So let's just keep it simple. Electrolytes are dissolved minerals that carry an electrical charge, which can be either positive or negative. So minerals, of course, are these little micronutrients that we find all in our natural world, in our diets. And the most important electrolytes in the body are sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, and bicarbonate. What electrolytes do in the body depends on which electrolyte we're looking at. They do many different things. So sodium and potassium, for example, regulate our fluid balance. This is what we're talking about when we look at our sodium and potassium pump and nerve transmission, the transmission of nervous impulses. When we're looking at magnesium, magnesium acts as a cofactor or an activator in upwards of 800 chemical reactions in the body. It does so many different things, ranging from energy metabolism to nucleotide synthesis, genes and proteins, just really diverse roles. Chloride also helps with regulating fluid balance and pH and this nerve and muscle function along with sodium and potassium. And then calcium, which everybody thinks of as being so important for our bones, is also a really important electrolyte that's involved in cell signaling, blood clotting, and muscle contraction. So I want to point out one thing that a lot of people get confused about with electrolytes and minerals is that we're not necessarily talking about two different things when I talk about the calcium in the bones versus the calcium as an electrolyte. It's just the form that it's found in. So for some of these, like calcium, we can see that it has a really important electrolyte role in the body, which is that state where it's dissolved in an aqueous, a water solution. Our body's full of water, of course, but then it also has this structural role where as a mineral, it's complexed with other things like phosphate. So we see the same thing with magnesium. And so it's important to understand that for some of these minerals, we can find them in a electrolyte form, and then we can also find them in a non-electrolyte form. And it really just depends on which one we're looking at. This isn't an important issue, but it just helps people to understand a little bit more what we're talking about when we're talking about electrolytes and how that's different from the way that we sometimes talk about minerals in another context. So where do we find electrolytes? Well, we find them in food. Things that people sometimes forget is that food is filled with water. So in fact, our food for many different food forms like fruits and vegetables is upwards of 80% water. So if you have minerals in that water part of your food and they're dissolved, well, they're actually going to be in an electrolyte form. We also have foods that are much drier, they don't have as much moisture, and they can contain minerals, but then when they go through the process of digestion in the water solutions of our body, then they become electrolytes. So point here is that electrolytes from food are a really great source of electrolytes that end up in our body. Now, unfortunately, our modern soil is incredibly depleted of minerals, particularly things like minerals like magnesium. And so what we see and how that translates into our food status is that the soil depletion has also depleted the electrolyte content in our foods. Now, this is essentially, though, for us at Fringe, this mineral electrolyte story is a story of water. And so when we're talking about water, we need to recognize that water is not just H2O. Water is, in fact, a source of minerals. And because these minerals are in water, they're dissolved and they're in that electrolyte form. So most of the electrolytes, the most common electrolytes found in water are sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, and calcium. We also have some other ones like bicarbonate and sulfur. Modern water, however, has a very, very different composition than natural water. It's either depleted of minerals or it's contaminated with a really wide range of pollutants. Historically speaking, this natural water has made a very significant contribution to our mineral and electrolyte intake. The highest would be from calcium and magnesium. For some people, historically speaking, depending on the geographical region that they're getting their water from, they could be receiving upwards of 20% of their daily intake of calcium and magnesium from their water. When we talk about food and requirements and water and requirements, though, we've really lost sight of the fact that natural water historically contributed to our intake of some very, very important, particularly the mineral electrolyte nutrients. So if we want to look at a more appropriate representation of intake and references, what we should do is include intakes from both our fluid sources, including our water, and our food sources to get a much more comprehensive and evolutionarily compatible level of intake. So we know today that our water is just terribly contaminated with a wide range of contaminants. We have contaminants from industrial pollution that have caused physical changes. Sometimes you can even see this in our water. But the more concerning really are these chemical contaminants, including things like arsenic and cadmium, lead, chromium, and many others. And many of these are suspected or known carcinogens. In fact, a recent Environmental Working Group report described that tap water in the US can contain lead, arsenic, the PFAS, the forever chemicals, as well as medical waste. So the solution to dealing with this very important water pollution problem is to filter the water. And reverse osmosis systems are really our most advanced way of doing that. But the problem is that these systems don't distinguish between naturally occurring healthy nutrients like magnesium and calcium and these unhealthy nutrients, minerals like lead and arsenic. So what we end up with at the end of this reverse osmosis or even these lesser technologically advanced filtration systems is demineralized water. So we've removed that water as a source of really essential nutrients. There are some significant and well-recognized health effects of drinking demineralized water. Very few people are aware that there are differences between drinking mineralized water versus a reverse osmosis or demineralized water. And here are the top three that have been observed. So one, when we drink a demineralized water, we actually lose more minerals from the body than if we're drinking a mineralized water. And the difference can be upwards of 20%. So we're going to see these body minerals being excreted from the body in the urine, the feces, and the sweat. And in children, this has even been noted to slow growth, and it can also lead to dental cavities. We see that there's additionally a water loss. So not just a mineral loss from the body, there's a water loss from the body. So if you do a comparison between drinking reverse osmosis water and mineralized water, and you look at the water losses from the body, again, there's an up to 20% increased excretion of water in studies of human volunteers. So it's really significant. And then lastly, we see impaired electrolyte homeostasis. Homeostasis is balance. So drinking demineralized water can impair our electrolyte homeostasis, and this can lead to some really significant cellular changes, including an increased risk of some cancers. Of course, there are advantages to demineralizing water. There's no doubt about that. The advantages are that we're removing the contaminants. The advantages of drinking tap water would be, however, that the minerals are present. So we have to weigh the pros and cons. The cons of the tap water are that it contains contaminants. The cons of the filtered water are that the minerals are removed. So either way, you have an advantage and you have a disadvantage. But we have a solution. And the solution is to just simply remineralize your water. Now, before we get into talking about how we can do that, let's talk a little bit about electrolyte deficiencies and what this looks like and how it manifests. So this will occur when you have too little of one of the particular, or one or more of the electrolytes, and the symptoms really depend on which one is deficient. We can see things like dehydration, poor dietary intake, diuretics, vomiting, diarrhea, kidney disorder, hormone imbalances. These are all things that cause electrolyte deficiencies. Dehydration is the one that we need to highlight because many, many, many people today are just simply dehydrated, which can lead to electrolyte deficiencies. The signs of deficiency are going to depend on what's deficient. So for example, if you're deficient in sodium, you may have fatigue or headaches, nausea, muscle cramps. If you're deficient in potassium, weakness, constipation, fatigue, or muscle cramps as well. Magnesium deficiency is well known to cause muscle cramps, loss of appetite, fatigue, or numbness. Chloride can cause vomiting, dehydration, fatigue, and muscle weakness. And calcium deficiency, again, muscle cramps, numbness, fatigue, and it can affect your heart rhythm. So solution, it's so simple. We simply need to remineralize our water, and there are different ways of doing that. We can consume bottled mineralized water. We can include a remineralization system in a reverse osmosis as the end point. There are lots of different ways of doing it, but at Fringe we believe in keeping things as simple as possible. And it's very, very easy to remineralize your water by simply adding a scoop of Fringe electrolyte and mineral mix. So why Fringe electrolyte and mineral mix relative to some of the other products on the market? We have several advantages that I want to talk about today. So first of all, what our electrolyte and mineral mix is it's a mineral electrolyte blend that dissolves in water. It's naturally sourced, it has clean ingredients, and it's part of Fringe's essential supplement line. We have an unflavored form and we have a flavored form, and our flavored form is raspberry flavored. Both of them have the same active ingredient formulation, but they vary in terms of their inactive ingredients, which we're going to look at in just a moment. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the 5 attributes that Fringe is committed to in terms of creating all of our supplements, which I think really distinguish us from the rest of the products on the market. The first one is that our formulations are incredibly simple. We don't include ingredients that don't need to be there. And we characterize this as our small scoops mission. We don't have big giant scoops that you have to put into a cup of water. We keep things really simple and we make sure that everything has a purpose. We use clean and natural ingredients, so never possible non-GMO, organic, and naturally sourced. We use effective doses. We make sure that what's in there is actually what you need to support and optimize your health. We're incredibly transparent. We don't include things that are not shown on our label. And while you may not think this is an issue in the industry, it actually is, as we're going to talk about shortly. And then lastly, we do very comprehensive third-party testing to ensure that all of our products, every batch is safe. So our active ingredients, what do we have? This is an electrolyte mix, and so we want to make sure that we have several different forms of electrolytes in there. So we have sodium chloride, and we have potassium, we have magnesium, we have calcium, and we have trace minerals. Remember, I talked about naturally sourcing. So we have gone to nature in order to get these ingredients. So our sodium chloride comes from pure ocean sea salt from Australian seawater. Our potassium is naturally mined and refined. Our magnesium is naturally mined and refined. Our calcium comes from calcified algae. And our trace minerals come from the Great Salt Lake and include iodine, selenium, molybdenum, zinc, copper, and manganese. The benefits of these trace minerals are significant, and they're very unusual and distinguish us in the marketplace because most electrolyte supplements don't include any trace minerals. They include electrolytes, but they leave these out. And why trace minerals are important is that they're like the support players behind the scenes. They help to support the main players of the electrolytes, and they do things like help enzymes to function, support immune health, support thyroid function, help with antioxidant defense, and help to form connective tissue. So they do a lot of different things, and they really work synergistically along with the electrolytes that we just talked about. So Fringe's electrolyte and mineral mix is so named because it contains electrolytes and then it contains trace minerals as well. So our electrolyte content, this is an interesting topic because if you go and take a sample of electrolytes from the existing market, none of them will have the same electrolyte content. It's always going to be variable. Some of them will be extremely high in certain nutrients, some will be extremely low, and then there's everything in between. So it's an important question to ask, well, how did we come up with our levels and what did we use as our guiding principles? Well, it's very simple. We used nature. So in terms of looking at things like the amount of magnesium and the amount of calcium, we looked at what's naturally occurring in water in different reservoirs and sources around the world. In terms of how much sodium and potassium, we used the ratios of sodium and potassium that are found in the body as well. So we looked to nature outside of us and inside of us to determine how to formulate our electrolytes. And we end up with a product that has an electrolyte content that's not too low, it's not too high, it's just right, and it's safe for almost everybody. So what's in it in terms of our inactive ingredients? For unflavored, we have really only one. We have organic agave inulin from chicory root. This is important for dosing. We need to be able to have accurate dosing, but it serves additional purpose and it helps to feed the gut microbiome. It's a prebiotic fiber. This is extremely uncommon. If you look at other products on the market, usually your inactive ingredient list is extremely long. So we're very proud of this distinguishing feature. In our flavored electrolytes, we have organic freeze-dried raspberry, real fruit. We have L-malic acid, which is naturally found in the metabolic cycle of the human body. We have organic agave inulin, again for the prebiotic fiber and the dosing. And then we have thaumatin, which is a protein-based sweetener from the katemfi fruit from Africa. So relative to what else you'll find for flavored electrolytes, an extremely, extremely unique and minimal in terms of its content and extremely clean ingredient list. The existing market for electrolytes is really characterized by three things. So one being very high sugar content for some products. I don't need to name names, but certainly most of us know that many of the sports drinks and things that people consume contain a lot of sugar. Sometimes there's a rationale for that for certain athletes doing certain activities, but we prefer to keep that ingredient out of our products. And if you want carbohydrates, you can get them from another source. A lot of the time that sugar comes from high fructose corn syrup. This is not a healthy ingredient to be consuming, so we're committed to avoiding these entirely. There's also, and I think this one to me is the most concerning, a lot of chemicals. So things like artificial sweeteners, sodium benzoate, food dyes, potassium sorbate, polyethylene glycol, and polysorbate 60. These are really commonly found in many of the products on the market. And then, as I just mentioned, the electrolyte content is extremely variable. Sometimes things are really high, sometimes things are really low. We were very careful in our formulations and just looked to create something that reflected nature as much as possible. Even high quality electrolyte supplements have three common ingredients that we're committed to leave out of our products. These include natural flavors, citric acid, and stevia. So natural flavors, this is the fourth most commonly used food ingredient on food labels. It's something that's incredibly misleading because when you hear this, often you think it's a single ingredient and you think it's a natural ingredient. But the reality is that while you started with a natural ingredient, the end product can be very heavily modified. And it can include things like carriers and solvents and stabilizers like propylene glycol and polysorbate 80. They don't need to be listed on the ingredient list, even though they're there. Citric acid is also very common in electrolyte supplements and products. Citric acid is a really nice powdery substance. It helps with dosing. It has an interesting flavor that people find very appealing, but it's industrially produced through the fermentation of a form of black mold. This is certainly something that can be compensated for by doing extensive analysis on the finished product to make sure that there's no mold contamination. But if a company isn't doing that, there is a potential concern of mold contamination in that final product. And so that's something that just as a consumer, you should be aware. There's also some reported negative responses in people with certain health conditions like mold sensitivities, histamine intolerance, mast cell activation syndrome, and autoimmune diseases. So we've made a commitment to use some very useful alternatives to citric acid. And then lastly, there's stevia. Stevia is extremely common in natural products, in clean products. It is something that provides a very small or a very large amount of flavor for a very small amount. So it's a non-nutritive sweetener. It's plant-derived. We have chosen to avoid including stevia in our products simply because there is emerging research that is demonstrating that for some people there can be a little bit of an adverse effect on the gut microbiome. So rather than stevia, we've chosen to use other flavoring that other sweeteners that don't have this potential conflict with them. In terms of what is not in our products, what have we committed to not including? As we've already discussed, no citric acid, no sugar, no stevia, no gluten, no GMOs, no dairy, no soy or protein, and no natural flavors. And our products are as uniquely distinguished by what we don't include in them as by what we do include. And we're very proud of that. We go through, all of our products go through very extensive third-party testing for molds and mycotoxins, for pesticides, and for heavy metals. We test extensively for all of these, including 59 heavy metals or 59 pesticides and heavy metals, including arsenic and cadmium and mercury and lead. We use a third-party lab for our testing. This is really important. Rather than doing in-house testing, which has a risk of bias, we send it out and we make sure that there's no bias that's potentially included in our assessment of safety. And we also are unique in that we test every single batch of our products. So when you buy one of our products, all you need to do is scan the barcode and it will bring you to what's called a certificate of analysis for that particular product. And you'll be able to look and see and ensure that what you're consuming is entirely safe and optimal for your health and wellness. How much of our electrolytes you should take is really entirely at your discretion. For most adults, 1 to 2 scoops per day is plenty. Because of the way that we formulated, though, in terms of not being too high in ingredients like sodium, there isn't a safety risk for most people in even going up to 3 or 4 scoops per day. And certainly if you're exercising and you're sweating a lot, or perhaps you have had an illness and you've experienced vomiting and diarrhea, you may need more than 1 to 2 scoops per day. It's also safe for kids. So for kids, all we need to do is just adjust the dosing a little bit. So 1/3 of a scoop for kids age 2 to 8, 1/2 of a scoop for age 9 to 12, and a full scoop for age 12 and over. So really easy to use and very consumer friendly. If you have any questions about our electrolyte mix or any of our other products, please feel free to reach out to us at customer service, hi@fringeheals.com. We really love to hear from you. You can also visit our website at www.fringeheals.com and check out our products and our extensive research and blogs where we describe all of our products in a lot more detail. So thanks for your attention.